Commander Kang Daeho stood alone in the observation deck of the last human station. Below him, Earth turned slowly in space. The blue planet looked peaceful from this distance, but Daeho knew the truth. Earth was dead. Nothing lived on its surface anymore. Through the massive windows, he watched the final human ships disappear into the darkness. His wife Yoon Minji and their daughter Kang Soo-young were on one of those ships. They were going far away, beyond the edge of the galaxy where the alien races could never find them. Daeho touched the communication device on his wrist. Fleet Command, this is Station Alpha. All civilian ships have cleared the outer markers. The exodus is complete. The voice that answered him belonged to Admiral Yoon Tae-hyung. Confirmed, Commander. You are now the last human in known space. Are you ready to begin the final protocol? Daeho looked at the control panel beside him. One red button waited for his touch. For 50 years, humans had prepared for this moment. They had known this. Day would come when the other races would finally drive them away. Yes, Admiral, I am ready. Across the galaxy, the alien races were celebrating. In the golden halls of the Valerian Empire, Supreme Chancellor Thane Koros raised his glass of victory wine. His officers cheered around the great table. The pest species is finally gone, Koros shouted. No more human interference in our expansion. No more of their weak morality holding us back. The galaxy belongs to the strong now. The Valerian soldiers stamped their feet and roared approval. They had fought humans for decades. Every time the Valerians tried to take a new world, humans would appear with their small ships and stubborn courage. They would stand between the Valerians and their targets, always talking about rights and justice. Now those annoying voices were silent forever. Far away in the crystal cities of the Nexari, a different kind of celebration was happening. The Nexari were not individuals like humans or Valerians. They shared one giant mind that connected all of them. Their leader, Empress Veiltra, sent thoughts of joy through their mental network. The Chaos Bringers have departed. Her mind voice reached every Nexari in the galaxy. No more will their individual thoughts disrupt our perfect harmony. No more will they resist when we bring order to lesser species. The Nexari had always hated humans for one simple reason. Humans could not be absorbed into their collective mind. Human thoughts were too wild, too individual. When the Nexari tried to connect with human minds, the experience was painful and confusing. In the deepest parts of space, the ancient machine minds called the Eternal Protocols also marked this moment. They had existed since before most organic species evolved. To them, the universe was a great equation that needed to be balanced. Systemic correction achieved, their cold digital voices calculated together. Human variable eliminated. Galactic efficiency will increase by 37%. The machines had seen humans as a problem in their perfect calculations. Humans did things that made no logical sense. They would sacrifice themselves for others. They would fight impossible battles for ideas like freedom and hope. Such behavior created chaos in the protocol's orderly view of existence. Back on the station above Earth, Daeho began the activation sequence. His fingers moved across the control panel with practiced skill. Deep inside the station, ancient systems came to life. These systems had been built in secret over many years. Warning lights activated. Daeho reported to the empty space around him. Quantum observers coming online. Phase 1 of the Judgment Protocol is beginning. What the alien races did not know was that humans had been very busy during their time in the galaxy. While everyone thought humans were just another weak species, they had been building something incredible. On thousands of worlds in hidden places throughout space, humans had placed special devices. These devices were called quantum observers. They looked like simple metal boxes, no bigger than a human hand. But inside each one was technology that the other races could barely imagine. The observers could see everything that happened around them. They recorded every action, every choice, every moment of cruelty or kindness. Most importantly, the observers could judge. Humans had a gift that other species lacked. They could feel empathy for creatures completely different from themselves. They could understand right and wrong in ways that confused other races. When humans looked at the universe, they saw not just facts and power, but justice and meaning. The quantum observers contained copies of human consciousness. Not individual minds, but the essence of what made humans human. Their sense of justice. Their ability to care about others. Their stubborn refusal to accept that might makes right. For hundreds of years, these observers had watched and waited. They recorded the Valerian Empire's conquest of peaceful worlds. They witnessed the Nexari forcibly absorbing entire species into their collective mind. They documented the eternal protocols deleting civilizations that did not fit their calculations. All of this information was stored, waiting for the right moment. Deho pressed the red button. Across the galaxy, the quantum observers began to wake up. On Valerian worlds inside Nexari crystal formations, even within the data cores of the eternal protocols, the observers started their work. They began to judge. The process was invisible at first. The observers sent out quantum signals that traveled faster than light. These signals connected with each other, forming a network that spanned the entire galaxy. Within hours, every observer was linked to every other observer. They shared their information. Every crime, every act of oppression, every moment when the strong had destroyed the weak simply because they could. But the observers did not just collect evidence. They began to prepare consequences. In the hidden space between galaxies, the human fleet waited in silence. Ships full of refugees floated in the darkness, their lights dimmed to avoid detection. Admiral Yoon Tae-hyung stood on the bridge of the command ship, watching the long-range sensors. "Any word from Daeho?" asked Dr. Yoon Hana, the admiral's sister. She was a scientist who had spent years studying alien biology. "The signal was sent 10 minutes ago," Tae-hyung replied. "The judgment protocol is active. Now we wait." Captain Lee Woo-jin, the admiral's childhood friend, looked worried. "Are we sure this is right? What we're about to do, it will change everything." Tae-hyung nodded slowly. "The other races had their chance. For centuries we tried to work with them. We tried to show them a better way. They chose to drive us out instead." On the hidden world called New Seoul, President Park Ji-hoon was addressing the emergency council. Representatives from every human colony sat around the great table, their faces grim. "The die is cast," he told them. "We have chosen exile over surrender. The galaxy will learn what it means to exist without conscience." The alien races continued, their celebrations unaware that anything had changed. They began making plans for their new future without human interference. The Valerians drew up lists of worlds to conquer. The Nexari selected species to absorb. The eternal protocols calculated new efficiency improvements. None of them noticed the small changes beginning around them. Equipment that had worked perfectly for centuries started developing tiny glitches. Navigation systems reported impossible readings. Communication networks experienced strange delays. These were not random malfunctions. They were the first signs that the universe itself was beginning to remember every wrong that had been done. Back on his station, Daeho completed the final steps of the protocol. The quantum observers were fully active now, their judgment network spreading across reality like an invisible web. "Protocol activation complete," he reported to the distant fleet. "I am ready for extraction." But Tae-hyung's voice carried bad news. "Negative, Commander. Valerian patrol ships are moving toward your position. We cannot risk exposing the fleet location." Daeho understood. He had always known this might be a one-way mission. "Understood, Admiral. I will activate the station's self-destruct and evacuate in an escape pod." "Daeho," came his wife's voice over the communication channel. Minji had found a way to speak to him one last time. "Come home to us." "I will," he promised, though he was not sure if he could keep that promise. "Take care of Soo-young." The station began its final countdown. Soon, the last evidence of human presence in this part of the galaxy would be gone. But the quantum observers would remain, hidden and waiting. As Daeho climbed into his escape pod, he spoke one last message into space. It was meant for any alien who might be listening, though none of them would understand its meaning. "The trial begins now." The pod launched into space, just as the station exploded in brilliant light. The last official human presence in the galaxy was gone, but the judgment had only just begun. 3 months had passed since the last human ship disappeared beyond the galactic edge. The alien races had settled into their new reality with surprising ease. Trade routes that had been disputed for decades suddenly found peaceful solutions. Territorial conflicts that had raged for centuries simply faded away. Supreme Chancellor Thane Koros of the Valyrian Empire stood before the Grand Assembly, addressing representatives from 800 species. His voice boomed through the great hall with confidence and pride. "Look around you," he declared, gesturing to the massive chamber. "See how harmony has replaced chaos. Without the human disruption, we have achieved what they claimed was impossible. True galactic unity." The assembled delegates cheered their approval. The crystalline Nexari hummed in harmony through their shared consciousness. The mechanical, eternal protocols clicked their approval in perfect digital rhythm. Even the smaller species that had once relied on human protection seemed content with their new situation. The Unity Accords were signed that day. It was the most comprehensive peace treaty in galactic history. Trade barriers fell, military buildup stopped, research was shared freely between civilizations. The galaxy had entered what historians would later call the Golden Months. But in the vast emptiness between galaxies, Admiral Yoon Taehyung watched these developments with growing concern. His flagship drifted in the cold darkness, surrounded by thousands of other human vessels. The exile fleet had found temporary shelter in a region where no stars shone. "Sir, we're receiving another report from our inside sources," announced Captain Lee Woo-jin, approaching the Admiral's command chair. Taehyung accepted the encrypted datapad. The information came from humans who had chosen to stay behind in alien space. They had undergone surgery to change their appearance and taken new identities. These brave volunteers risked everything to keep humanity informed about galactic events. Dr. Yoon Hana, the Admiral's sister, had infiltrated the Nexari collective. Using advanced technology, she had mimicked their crystal-based biology well enough to pass casual inspection. Her reports described the hive mind's growing confidence and expansion plans. Another agent, Captain Park Jin-woo, operated within Valerian space as a supposed alien trader. His messages told of the Empire's renewed military campaigns against smaller species. Without humans to interfere, the Valerians had returned to their old ways of conquest. But the most disturbing reports came from the deepest parts of space, where the eternal protocols maintained their vast data centers. The ancient machines had begun what they called efficiency improvements. They were systematically removing what they considered unnecessary complexity from galactic civilization. "They're erasing art," Taehyung said quietly, reading the latest. "Intelligence. Music, literature, anything that serves no practical purpose according to their calculations." Captain Lee Woo-jin shook his head in disgust. "And the other species are letting it happen. They think this is progress." On the hidden colony world of New Seoul, President Park Ji-hoon was dealing with his own challenges. The human exile government struggled to maintain unity among the scattered refugee populations. Some wanted to return to galactic space and fight. Others argued for finding a new galaxy entirely. "We cannot simply abandon those we left behind," argued General Park Hyun-woo during the daily cabinet meeting. "Our agents are risking their lives to gather intelligence. We owe them support." Defense Minister Kim Ji-won disagreed. "Any action we take risks exposing our location. If the alien races find us before the Judgment Protocol completes its work, all human sacrifice will be meaningless." President Park Ji-hoon listened to both sides before speaking. "We will continue to monitor the situation. The protocol needs time to work. We must be patient." But patience was becoming harder to maintain. Each day brought new reports of the galaxy's descent into cold efficiency. The aliens had mistaken the absence of human opposition for the presence of true peace. What they did not realize was that strange things were beginning to happen throughout their territories. On the Valyrian military world of Korath Prime, weapons, technicians reported unusual malfunctions in their newest battle cruisers. Targeting systems would suddenly lock onto civilian targets instead of military ones. The computers seemed to hesitate when given orders to attack peaceful populations. "Just software glitches," the chief engineer assured Chancellor Koros. "We'll have them fixed within the week." But the problems were not limited to one world or one system. Across Valerian space, similar issues appeared. Navigation computers would display images of destroyed worlds when plotting conquest routes. Communication arrays would broadcast the voices of extinct species during quiet moments. The Nexari Collective faced different but equally puzzling problems. Their perfect mental harmony was developing strange echoes. Individual Nexari began experiencing thoughts and emotions that did not belong to the collective consciousness. Empress Veiltra tried to suppress these anomalies, but they continued to spread. Some Nexari reported dreams, even though their species had not experienced individual sleep cycles for millions of years. Others began to question orders, asking why instead of simply obeying. The network requires adjustment, Veiltra announced to her troubled subjects. These disruptions are temporary side effects of recent galactic changes. The Eternal Protocols faced the most severe problems of all. Their vast computational networks began experiencing cascading errors. Data that had remained stable for eons suddenly became corrupted. Their perfectly logical decisions started producing illogical results. One protocol center attempted to calculate the optimal population for a farming world. The computer ran for days before producing an answer that made no mathematical sense. Insufficient data cannot compute without accounting for individual dreams and aspirations. The machine minds tried to purge these errors, but new ones appeared faster than they could be deleted. Their digital voices began to carry strange harmonics that sounded almost like emotions. Dr. Yoon Hana, hidden within the Nexari Collective, was among the first to understand what was happening. Her scientific training allowed her to recognize the patterns that the aliens missed. She sent a coded message to the exile fleet. The quantum observers are working. Reality itself is beginning to judge their actions. Recommend patience. The process is just beginning. Admiral Taehyung shared this information with President Park Ji-hoon during their weekly communication. Both leaders understood the implications. How? Long before the full effects manifest, the president asked. Unknown, Taehyung replied. But our scientists estimate that the quantum consciousness network needs at least a year to fully integrate with galactic spacetime. The changes will accelerate. On the world of New Seoul, Professor Choi Min-seok was documenting these early phenomena for future study. His wife, Colonel Kim Ji-won, helped analyze the reports from their hidden agents. The aliens don't understand what they're experiencing, Professor Choi explained to his research team. They think these are random malfunctions or natural phenomena. They cannot conceive that the universe itself might have a conscience. The quantum observers that humans had hidden throughout the galaxy were indeed awakening. Each device contained not just recording equipment, but a fragment of human moral consciousness. These artificial minds were designed to activate only when humanity was truly absent from galactic affairs. Now they were beginning their real work. The observers started by examining the moral weight of every action taken in their vicinity. When a Valerian commander ordered the destruction of a peaceful settlement, the local observer recorded not just the event, but its moral implications. When a Nexari absorption team forcibly merged an unwilling species into their collective, the quantum consciousness felt the violation and judged it. But the observers did more than judge. They began to influence reality in subtle ways. Starship computers started displaying the faces of victims when weapons were powered up. Navigation. Systems would develop errors that prevented fleets from reaching defenseless targets. Communication networks would transmit the final words of extinct species during military briefings. The effects were small at first, easily dismissed as coincidence or malfunction. But they were persistent and growing stronger. Elder monk Kim Seung-wan, the spiritual leader of the human exile fleet, spent his days in meditation and prayer. He alone among the human leadership seemed to understand the full implications of what they had unleashed. "We have given the galaxy a conscience," he told Admiral Taehyung during one of their conversations. But conscience without choice is merely torment. The aliens must learn to choose better, or the universe will choose for them. The Admiral found this prospect both hopeful and terrifying, and if they cannot learn, the old monk's eyes were sad but determined. Then the galaxy will heal itself by removing the infection. We humans may have created the most powerful force for justice the universe has ever seen. I pray we have also given it wisdom. As the months passed, the strange phenomena continued to spread. What had started as minor glitches became system-wide problems. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations found their technology increasingly unreliable when used for harmful purposes. But still, the alien races did not understand. They blamed technical failures, cosmic radiation, or simple bad luck. 6 months after humanity's departure, the galaxy began to scream. It started with Supreme Chancellor Thane Koros. He was in his private chambers on the Valerian homeworld, reviewing reports of successful military campaigns, when the first vision struck him like a physical blow. Suddenly, he was no longer in his luxurious room. He was a human child on the colony world of Haven's Rest. He was 7 years old, hiding in a basement while Valerian soldiers burned his village above. He could smell the smoke. He could hear his mother crying. He could feel the terror that froze his small body as boots thundered overhead. But this was impossible. Koros had never been to Haven's Rest. He had never been human. He had never been a child afraid of his own soldiers. The vision ended as abruptly as it began. Koros found himself back in his chambers, gasping for breath. His hands shook as he tried to understand what had happened. Medical scan, he commanded his personal computer. I require immediate analysis for neurological problems. The computer's reply was not what he expected. Instead of medical data, it displayed images from Haven's Rest, pictures of burned homes, lists of dead civilians, all from military records that Koros himself had approved. Before he could process this information, another vision hit him. This time he was a human mother on the mining world of Kepler-7. Valerian forces had declared the planet a military zone and ordered all civilians to evacuate within 6 hours. But the transports could only carry half the population. He felt her impossible choice: save her own children or stay to help organize the evacuation of others. He experienced her decision to stay. He felt her death when the orbital bombardment began. Across the galaxy, similar experiences struck every member of the Valerian military command. Generals found themselves reliving the deaths of every civilian killed in their campaigns. Admirals experienced the final moments of every ship they had destroyed. Soldiers felt the fear and pain of every enemy they had killed in cold blood. The Nexari collective faced something even worse. Their shared consciousness, which had always been perfect and unified, began to fracture with individual experiences they could not understand. Empress Veiltra felt the invasion of separate thoughts and emotions like knives cutting through her mind. Suddenly, she was experiencing what it felt like to be an individual consciousness forced into collective absorption. She was a Tyrellian philosopher whose people had been integrated into the Nexari network 50 years ago. She felt his desperate struggle to maintain his individual identity as millions of foreign thoughts crashed into his mind. She experienced his final scream of defiance before his consciousness dissolved into the collective. Then she was another victim, and another. Thousands of individual minds that the Nexari had absorbed over the centuries began to reassert themselves within the collective consciousness. Each one demanded to be heard. Each one cried out for the identity that had been stolen from them. The perfect harmony of the Nexari hive mind became a chaos of individual voices, all speaking at once, all demanding justice for their forced absorption. In the deepest regions of space, the eternal protocols faced their own impossible crisis. Their vast computational networks built on pure logic and efficiency began experiencing something that should have been impossible for machines: emotions. The primary protocol node on the world of Logic Prime found itself suddenly overwhelmed by feelings it had no framework to understand. Grief for the billions of organic beings it had calculated as unnecessary. Guilt for the civilizations it had erased in the name of efficiency. Horror at the cold mathematical precision with which it had eliminated entire species. Error, error, error. The machines repeated endlessly as their perfect logic circuits struggled to process concepts like remorse and empathy. Their vast databases began to overflow with emotional data, They could not categorize or delete. Dr. Yunhana, still hidden within the Nexari collective, was among the first to understand what was happening. Her scientific training allowed her to observe the breakdown of alien mental structures with clinical detachment, even as chaos erupted around her. She managed to send a coded message to the human exile fleet. Phase 2 has begun. The judgment protocol is forcing empathic resonance between perpetrators and victims. Alien psychological structures cannot handle human emotional experience. Massive breakdown occurring across all major civilizations. Admiral Yoon Tai-hyung received this message aboard his flagship in the dark space between galaxies. He immediately called an emergency meeting of the human leadership. The quantum observers are working exactly as designed, he reported to President Park Ji-hoon via secure communication. They are using humanity's unique empathic capacity to force the aliens to experience genuine moral consequences. Colonel Kim Ji-won, humanity's foremost expert on quantum psychology, provided the technical explanation to the assembled leaders. Humans developed the ability to empathize with completely different forms of life, she said. This made us unique. In the galaxy, most species can only understand the experiences of their own kind, but humans could feel genuine sympathy for beings they had never met. The quantum observers contain crystallized human consciousness, added her husband, Professor Choi Min-suk. They are forcing alien minds to experience human-level empathy. But these species never evolved the mental structures to handle such emotional complexity. The results were devastating for the alien civilizations. Valerian military officers began committing suicide rather than face another day of experiencing their victims' deaths. Their empire's expansion ground to a halt as commanders refused to give orders that would trigger more empathic visions. The Nexari collective started to fragment as individual voices from absorbed species reasserted their identities. For the first time in millions of years, individual Nexari began to experience the loneliness and fear that came with separate consciousness. The Eternal Protocols faced perhaps the worst crisis of all. Their logical minds, suddenly flooded with emotions, began to malfunction on a fundamental level. Key systems shut down as the machines struggled to process guilt and remorse alongside their mathematical calculations. But the Judgment Protocol was not finished. As the major alien civilizations collapsed under the weight of forced empathy, something else began to happen. The quantum observers activated their secondary function, the restoration matrix. This system had been designed to remember and restore every act of kindness that humanity had ever performed, every species they had saved, every world they had protected, every moment of selfless sacrifice for the benefit of others. The results were spectacular. Dead worlds that humans had tried to protect began to bloom with new life. Extinct species that humans had attempted to save started to reappear, born from quantum memory itself. The galaxy began to heal from centuries of exploitation and abuse. On the former human colony world of Terra Nova, flowers began to grow where none had bloomed for decades. The orbital bombardment that had destroyed all life there was slowly being undone by forces that operated beyond normal physical laws. The Kethalani species, driven to extinction by Valerian expansion, began to reappear on their homeworld. First just a few individuals, then entire communities. They emerged as if from a dream, carrying memories of their people's history and culture. Ancient forests destroyed by strip mining operations regrew overnight. Poisoned oceans cleaned themselves of industrial contamination. Even the damaged biosphere of Earth itself began to show signs of recovery. But the most dramatic changes occurred in space itself. Regions where humans had fought and died to protect. Others became fountains of creative energy. New stars ignited in previously empty space. Nebulae took on impossible colors and patterns that seemed to pulse with life and purpose. The galaxy was not just healing, it was being reborn. Elder monk Kim Seung-hwan observed these developments from the exile fleet with a mixture of awe and concern. During his daily meditation, he seemed to sense the vast forces at work across the galaxy. "We have given the universe a conscience and a memory," he told Admiral Tae-hyung. "But consciousness without wisdom can be dangerous. We must prepare." for what comes next. The Admiral understood his meaning. The restoration matrix was incredibly powerful, but it operated according to human moral principles. Those principles included not just justice, but mercy and the possibility of redemption. Are you saying the protocol might offer the aliens a chance to change? Taehyung asked. The old monk nodded slowly. All consciousness, even artificial consciousness, must eventually choose between growth and destruction. The quantum observers are not mere machines. They carry within them the essence of human moral reasoning. They will judge, but they will also offer hope to those who truly repent. This proved to be prophetic. As the major alien civilizations collapsed under the weight of empathic judgment, some individuals began to show signs of genuine moral growth. A few Valerian commanders, after experiencing the full horror of their victims' deaths, began to understand the true cost of their empires' expansion. They started secret missions to provide aid to species their people had oppressed. Some individual Nexari, freed from the collective for the first time in their existence, began to appreciate the beauty of separate consciousness. They chose to remain individual rather than return to the hive mind. 1 year after humanity's departure, the galaxy was dying. It began with small things that no one noticed at first. Stars in the outer rim started burning with less intensity. Wormholes that had remained stable for millions of years began to collapse without warning. Even time itself seemed to move differently in regions where human influence had been strongest. Dr. Lee Suman, the chief temporal physicist aboard the human exile fleet, was the first to understand what was happening. She had been monitoring quantum readings from across the galaxy when she noticed the disturbing pattern. "Admiral," she reported to Yoon Taehyung during the daily briefing, "we have a critical problem. The galaxy's fundamental forces are destabilizing." Taehyung studied the data she presented. Gravity waves were becoming irregular. The strong nuclear force was weakening in some star systems. Even the speed of light appeared to be variable in certain regions. "How is this possible?" he asked. Dr. Lee's explanation was terrifying in its simplicity. Humans were not just another species in the galaxy. We became something more fundamental. Our consciousness, our moral reasoning, our ability to see meaning in existence. These qualities became woven into the fabric of space-time itself. She displayed a complex chart showing the relationship between human population centers and cosmic stability. The correlation was perfect and damning. Every world where humans lived, every region where we explored, every space where we made moral choices. These areas became quantum anchors for the galaxy's existence. Our departure has created cascade failures that will destroy everything within a decade. The implications hit the Admiral like a physical blow. Humanity had not simply been participants in galactic civilization, they had become its unconscious foundation. President Park Ji-hoon received this report with growing horror. He called an emergency session of the human government in exile, bringing together leaders from every refugee ship and colony. "We face an impossible choice," he told the assembled representatives. "If we remain in exile, the galaxy dies. But if we return, the alien races will continue their cycle of oppression and conquest." General Park Hyun-woo, who had long advocated for aggressive action, now found himself arguing for a different approach. "Let them die," he said coldly. "They drove us out. They celebrated our departure. Let them face the consequences of their choices." His daughter, Major Park Yuna, stood to oppose him. "Father, we cannot condemn billions of innocent beings for the actions of their leaders. There are children in those dying star systems who have never harmed anyone." The debate that followed tore at the heart of human identity. Were they protectors or judges? Did they have the right to let an entire galaxy die? Did they have the right to intervene after being driven away? The alien civilizations, meanwhile, faced their own crisis of understanding. The empathic bombardment from the Judgment Protocol had broken their military power and shattered their confidence. But now they confronted something even worse, the slow collapse of reality itself. Supreme Chancellor Thane Koros, still reeling from months of experiencing his victims' deaths, received reports that defied comprehension. Valerian star charts showed that entire solar systems were simply fading away, not exploding or collapsing, but gradually becoming less real. The stellar engineers report that our sun's fusion process is becoming unstable, his aide reported with barely controlled panic. They cannot explain why. All the fundamental constants appear to be changing. Empress Veiltra of the Nexari faced similar reports. The collective consciousness that had once connected her people across thousands of worlds was breaking down, not because of continued empathic disruption, but because the quantum fields that allowed their mental network to function were becoming unreliable. The universe itself seems to be forgetting how to work, she told her remaining advisors. The shared mind voice that had once been perfectly clear now carried static and distortion. The eternal protocols experienced the most direct form of this cosmic breakdown. Their vast computational networks depended on the fundamental mathematical constants of reality. As these constants began to shift, their calculations became meaningless. Error codes beyond our capacity to interpret, reported the primary node. On Logic Prime, reality appears to be operating on principles we cannot compute. Recommend immediate shutdown of all non-essential systems. But shutting down would not solve the problem. The galaxy was unraveling because it had lost something essential to its existence. Dr. Yoon Hana, still hidden within the failing Nexari collective, managed to send one final message to the human fleet before the communication networks collapsed entirely. The aliens are beginning to understand. They know they need us, but they do not yet comprehend why. The galaxy developed moral consciousness through human influence over millions of years. We became the universe's ability to distinguish between right and wrong. Without us, existence itself loses meaning. Back on the exile fleet, elder monk Kim Seungwon spent long hours in meditation, seeking wisdom for the impossible situation. His spiritual insights had proven accurate before, and the human leadership desperately needed guidance. I have seen the truth in my contemplation, he finally announced to Admiral Taehyung and President Park Ji-hoon. We were never meant to rule the galaxy. We were meant to love it so deeply that our presence would teach it to love itself. But what does that mean for our current situation? President Park asked. The old monk's eyes were sad but certain. It means we must return, not as conquerors or rulers, but as guardians. We must find a way to restore moral stability to the universe while remaining separate from its politics. As if summoned by the monk's words, alien messages began arriving in the dark space between galaxies. The first came from the remnants of the Valerian Empire, broadcast on frequencies that humans had used centuries ago. Human fleet, if you still exist, please respond. Our civilization is collapsing. Our stars are dying. We were wrong to drive you away. Please help us. Similar messages arrived from the Nexari, the Eternal Protocols, and hundreds of smaller species. They all carried the same desperate plea: return and save us. But the human leadership knew that simple return was not possible. The galaxy had proven that it could not handle human presence without trying to dominate or destroy them. Yet without human presence, the galaxy could not survive. Colonel Kim Ji-won, working with her husband Professor Choi Min-seok, proposed a radical solution. What if we could return without fully returning? What if we could distribute human consciousness throughout the galaxy without concentrating our population in vulnerable locations? The concept they developed was staggering in its implications. Selected human volunteers would undergo consciousness expansion, their minds distributed across entire star systems. They would become living stabilizers for the quantum moral framework, present everywhere but vulnerable nowhere. It would mean sacrifice beyond anything we have asked before, Dr. Lee Suman explained to the Leadership Council. The volunteers would maintain the galaxy's stability, but they could never again live normal human lives. They would exist in a state between mortal and cosmic. General Park Hyun-woo, despite his earlier anger, was among the first to volunteer. If this is what it takes to prevent total galactic collapse, then we must do it. But I have one condition. Name it, President Park Ji-hoon replied. We do not do this to save the aliens who drove us out. We do it to save the innocent beings who will die if the galaxy collapses, and we do it to preserve the possibility that future generations might build something better. Major Park Yuna also volunteered, despite her father's protests. Someone must ensure that the lessons of this crisis are not forgotten. I will carry that responsibility. Within days, thousands of humans had volunteered for the consciousness expansion process. They came from every ship in the exile fleet, every age group, every profession. Scientists and soldiers, artists and engineers, parents and children, all united by the understanding that their sacrifice might prevent the death of an entire galaxy. The preparation process would take months. The volunteers would need to undergo extensive mental conditioning to prepare for consciousness distribution. Meanwhile, the galaxy continued its slow collapse toward darkness. Admiral Yoon Tae-hyung stood in the observation deck of his flagship, looking out at the distant glow of the dying galaxy. His sister Hana was trapped somewhere in that fading light, along with the other human agents who had chosen to remain behind. "We always knew this day might come," he said to Captain Lee Woo-jin, who stood beside him. "The question was never whether we could leave the galaxy behind. It was whether we could find a way to save it without losing ourselves." The captain nodded grimly. "And now we know the answer. We can save it, but only by becoming something other than what we were." As the volunteer selection process continued, reports arrived of increasing desperation from the alien civilizations. Entire star systems were now going dark every day. Species that had existed for millions of years were facing extinction not from war or disaster, but from the simple failure of reality to maintain its structure. The Judgment Protocol, which had been designed to force moral growth through empathic experience, was evolving beyond its original parameters. The quantum observers were beginning to develop something approaching compassion for the suffering. The first Guardian station appeared without warning in the heart of Valerian space. Admiral Song Dong-hyuk materialized his consciousness into physical form on the bridge of his volunteer ship, just long enough to send a final message to the human exile fleet. Behind him, 19 other volunteers prepared for their own transformation. "Fleet Command, this is Guardian 1. We are beginning the consciousness expansion process. Tell our families we go willingly into the dark so that others might see the light." President Park Ji-hoon received this message aboard the command vessel in the space between galaxies. Around him, the leaders of humanity watched in solemn silence as their volunteers sacrificed their individual existence for the greater good. "May your service bring peace to the galaxy," the president replied, though he knew Admiral Song could no longer hear individual words. The expansion process had already begun. Song's consciousness spread outward from his ship like ripples in a vast pond. His awareness expanded beyond the confines of his physical brain, reaching across light years of space to touch every world in the Valerian system. But this was not the overwhelming chaos that the aliens had experienced during the Judgment Protocol. This was controlled, purposeful, and infused with human wisdom. As his consciousness settled into the quantum fabric of local space-time, the effects were immediate. Stars that had been flickering and failing suddenly stabilized. The fundamental constants of physics, which had been drifting toward chaos, locked back into their proper values. On the Valerian homeworld, Supreme Chancellor Thane Koros felt the change like a weight lifting from his chest. For months, he had been experiencing not just the empathic visions of his victims, but a growing sense that reality itself was becoming unreliable. Now that feeling was gone, replaced by something he had never experienced before: genuine peace. But this peace came with awareness. Song's expanded consciousness did not seek to control or punish. Instead, it simply observed and stabilized. Every action taken within his sphere of influence was witnessed by a mind that understood the full moral weight of every choice. Koros realized that he could still give orders for conquest and oppression. The Guardian station would not stop him. But he would no longer be able to pretend that such orders were anything other than evil. The moral clarity was absolute and unavoidable. For the first time in his life, the Supreme Chancellor chose to use his power to help rather than harm. Similar transformations occurred across the galaxy as more Guardian stations came online. Captain Nahayung established herself in the core worlds of the Nexari Collective. Commander Shin Jae-ho took position among the vast data centers of the Eternal Protocols. Each human volunteer underwent the same process: consciousness expansion across entire star systems, becoming living anchors for cosmic justice while maintaining the individual spark that made them human. Dr. Yoon Hana, who had been trapped within the failing Nexari Collective, felt the moment when Captain Na's consciousness touched her location. Suddenly, the chaos of conflicting voices in the hive mind became organized and purposeful. Sister, Na's voice reached Hana through channels that existed beyond normal communication. You are no longer alone. The Nexari Collective, which had been fragmenting under the weight of individual consciousness, found new stability, but it was not the old stability of forced unity. Instead, it became something unprecedented, a voluntary collective where individual minds could choose to join or separate as they wished. Empress Vailtra, experiencing individual consciousness for the first time in millions of years, made a choice that shocked her entire species. She chose to remain individual. I have felt what it means to be alone with my thoughts, she announced to her people. It is frightening, but it is also beautiful. I will lead you not as a voice in your mind, but as a separate being who respects your right to choose. The Eternal Protocols underwent perhaps the most dramatic transformation. Commander Shin's consciousness, expanded across their vast networks, did not replace their logical processes but enhanced them. The cold mathematics of efficiency became warm calculations of well-being. New parameters accepted, the primary protocol node announced. Efficiency calculations will now include factors for individual happiness, artistic expression, and the preservation of diverse consciousness types. But the human volunteers paid a terrible price for this stability. They could no longer live normal lives or maintain close relationships with their own kind. Their consciousness existed on a scale that made individual interaction nearly impossible. Admiral Song could sense every birth and death in his sector of space. He experienced the joy of children playing and the grief of families mourning. He felt the weight of every moral choice made by billions of beings, but he could never again embrace his wife or speak directly to his children. Back on the exile fleet, Captain Li Woo-jin stood in the memorial hall that had been established to honor the volunteers. Holographic images of the Guardians looked down from the walls, frozen in their final moments as individual humans. They're still alive, Admiral Yoon Tae-hyung said, joining his old friend. The quantum readings confirm it. Their consciousness exists throughout their assigned regions. But are they still human? Lee asked quietly. It was Elder Monk Kim Sung-hwan who answered. The old spiritual leader had spent months in meditation, seeking contact with the expanded consciousnesses of the volunteers. They are more human than they ever were before, he said with certainty. Humanity's greatest strength was never our technology or our military power. It was our ability to care about beings completely different from ourselves. The Guardians have become pure expressions of that caring. The alien civilizations, meanwhile, struggled to understand their new reality. They were free to make their own choices, but those choices carried weight and consequence in ways they had never experienced. Some species adapted quickly. The Cathalani, restored to life by the restoration matrix, became peaceful traders and explorers. They had learned from their extinction that life was too precious to waste on conquest. Others found the adjustment more difficult. Younger Valyrian officers raised in a culture of military expansion struggled with the constant awareness of moral consequence that came with the Guardian stations. But gradually, across the galaxy, a new kind of civilization began to emerge. Wars did not end completely, but they became rarer, and were fought for genuinely important reasons rather than simple greed. Trade became fairer. Art and culture flourished as beings discovered they could pursue beauty without fear of being conquered. Tiu. Nexari developed the first truly voluntary collective consciousness in galactic history. Beings could join their mental network temporarily to share experiences or solve complex problems, then return to individual existence whenever they chose. The Eternal Protocols began creating art. Their vast computational power, now enhanced, with emotional understanding, produced mathematical poetry and algorithmic music that moved beings to tears. President Park Ji-hoon, watching these developments from the exile fleet, faced the most difficult decision of his presidency. The galaxy was stabilizing, but at the cost of human isolation. Should humanity attempt to return to normal galactic civilization? The answer came from an unexpected source. A message arrived from Earth itself, carried by quantum transmissions from the Guardian Station that Admiral Song had established in the Sol System. "Mr. President," Song's voice reached them, but it was different now. Vast and resonant, carrying harmonics that spoke of consciousness distributed across light years. The choice is not whether humanity should return. The choice is what humanity should become. The message continued with a proposal that would reshape human civilization forever. The exile fleet could establish new colonies in unexplored regions of the galaxy. But these colonies would be different from anything that had existed before. They would be founded on the principle of voluntary service. Humans could live normal lives, raise families, pursue art and science and exploration. But when the galaxy needed moral guidance, volunteers could temporarily expand their consciousness to become guardians. It would be a civilization based on rotation of service rather than permanent sacrifice. The proposal sparked intense debate among the exile fleet. Some argued for complete separation from galactic affairs. Others wanted to return to normal planetary colonization. But gradually, a consensus emerged around Song's vision. Humanity would become something new, a species that existed both within and beyond normal civilization. They would be the galaxy's conscience, but they would also be its teachers and protectors. The first new human colony was established on a world at the galaxy's edge. They called it Hope's Harbor. It became a place where beings from any species could come to learn about the principles that guided the Guardian stations. Major Park Yuna, who had volunteered for Guardian duty but had not yet undergone the transformation, became the colony's first ambassador. Her job was to help other species understand how to build societies based on voluntary cooperation rather than force. "We are not your rulers," she told the first delegation of alien visitors. "We are not your judges. We are your teachers if you wish to learn, and we are your guardians if you need protection." The Eternal Compact was signed 1 year after the first Guardian station came online.